Bitcoin dominance isn't just in a macro downtrend. I feel like Bitcoin represents sort of the best of the cryptoverse.
Could we say that Bitcoin at the moment is the safe asset of the crypto market?
I think that Bitcoin is the safe haven asset within the cryptoverse. A lot of us deep down believe that Bitcoin will survive.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts now on the kind of the meme coin psychology, but particularly within the Bitcoin ecosystem.
I get the hype behind altcoins. I get, that people really want meme coins to do well, but I can't ignore this chart, right? And I'll say this because it'll at least give people to talk about.
Okay, hello everyone and welcome back to the Binance Studios. My name is Jessica and I'm very excited to bring on board our next guest. If you are following the Bitcoin charts or all things crypto, you will know our next speaker, Benjamin Cowen from Into The Cryptoverse. But let's jump in because this has been a very exciting week for crypto. But I think the last 6 months in general, there's been a huge buildup. And for people that are watching your content will know you are known in the market as the one that makes the calls on Bitcoin dominance. We're mid-year and Bitcoin dominance has been sitting at a 4-year high at around 63%. But for those that are just tuning in, this is their first market cycle, I'd love to hear from you a breakdown on why this statistic is so significant following the crypto markets. And also, we are in June 2025. Has anything surprised you so far this year in crypto?
Yeah, a lot. And should I share my screen or just kind of talk?
I think sharing your screen would be fantastic if that's fine with you.
Yeah.
That would be a great extra bonus for all. Thank you.
All right. So yeah, so this cycle has been really interesting. And if you guys can see my screen, I really turned bullish on Bitcoin dominance back in about mid 2021 or so. Right around, I guess it was right around here, kind of like over here. And the reason is because I think I just assume that Bitcoin dominance isn't just in a macro downtrend, right? I feel like Bitcoin represents sort of the best of the cryptoverse and that altcoins have a time and a place, but that Bitcoin dominance is sort of the key to unlocking the secrets of the cryptoverse. And the reason for that is because we go through these cycles where Bitcoin dominance will just go up for years at a time. And so it's tempting during that time to make calls for alt season and whatnot. And for those that are unaware, if they're new to crypto, alt season effectively is when Bitcoin dominance collapses, right? It's when it collapses. And you can actually see it a little bit clearer if I go over to like monthly candles, and let me switch these over to say like Heikin-Ashi candles. So you can see that alt season, which is what a lot of people want to happen, is when you see Bitcoin dominance just like fall off a cliff. It happened in 2017, and it also happened in 2021. And so this cycle, people keep trying to time the top on this thing, and it just keeps on going higher, right? I mean, really, since the end of 2022, every Heikin-Ashi monthly candle for Bitcoin dominance has been green except for one, and that was the one in December 2024. And so the tricky part is figuring out, what's actually going to cause this thing to turn around, because Bitcoin still has a lot going for it, right? It has all the spot ETF flows. It also has monetary policy is more so on Bitcoin side than it is the altcoin market. And so the thing that has surprised me, I guess, since that was sort of the second part of the question, the thing that surprised me is that while I was always bullish on Bitcoin dominance back over here, and I've remained bullish on it, it's the Bitcoin dominance train has gone on a lot longer than I originally anticipated. And I think the reason for that is because of monetary policy, right? If you look at last cycle, if we overlay assets held by the Federal Reserve, you can see that last cycle, Bitcoin dominance really started to finally top out whenever the Fed went from quantitative tightening to quantitative easing, right? And so I think a lot of us back in 2021, 2022, when we sort of thought about this Bitcoin dominance uptrend as likely because of tighter monetary policy, we probably would have assumed that the tighter monetary policy probably would have ended by now, right? By mid 2025. And it still hasn't yet, right? We're still in quantitative tightening. We do have another FOMC meeting coming up really soon, right? Just like a week away, at least from the time of this interview. And so there's always a chance, right, that they end QT. But if they don't end quantitative tightening, then I think the base case has to be that Bitcoin dominance will likely go higher. And I mean, it doesn't have to immediately go higher. We could do what we did last year, where we get into sort of like a sideways period kind of in the early part of the summer. I could see that happening, but my honest thought on it is that Bitcoin dominance will go higher. And the main reason, besides monetary policy, is that I assume that altcoins are oscillators at best against Bitcoin, right? At best. And when you look at total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin, you can see the last 2 alt seasons occurred after alt Bitcoin pairs went to the range lows, where they were about equal to 25% of Bitcoin's market cap collectively. And note that they top out whenever they're equal to, where basically they reach parity, right? Whenever the altcoin market cap collectively is the same as Bitcoin's, like 0.991, and then they bottom out around 25% or so. And so the reason I think that people are continuing to be offsides on this alt season call is because altcoins just haven't yet gone down here to the range low. So I think once you get that, it's a necessary but not sufficient condition for Bitcoin dominance to top out.
Okay, interesting. On the back of that then, so we've mentioned why we've seen Bitcoin as this kind of the Bitcoin resilience of Bitcoin dominance kind of reaching these new highs. And also, as you said, like we have seen this environment last for longer than expected. Could we say that Bitcoin at the moment is the safe asset of the crypto market, especially when we have, including the factors, as you've mentioned, ETF inflows, regulatory clarity, as you've mentioned, kind of tighter monetary policy? Are we going to see a new tier of essentially institutional Bitcoin dominance that does last for longer and slightly change the market dynamics that we've seen in previous cycles?
It very well could, honestly. And I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I think that Bitcoin is the safe haven asset within the cryptoverse. And the reason is because there's a lot of macro uncertainty this cycle, right? Inflation, unemployment, right? Those things haven't been as well behaved sort of the last few years as they were for like the first 7 to 8 years of Bitcoin's life. And I think people just want to put their money somewhere and they want to put it in something that they think has a future. And regardless of what macro things we face over the next few years, a lot of us deep down believe that Bitcoin will survive. Like whatever happens, whatever is coming our way, like Bitcoin will likely survive and continue, eventually going back up like it always does. But you can't always say the same about every single altcoin, right? A lot of the altcoins come and go. There's only 2 or 3 altcoins that have stayed in the top 5, top 10 for more than one cycle. And so it goes to show like why you have to be very careful with altcoins, because like if your person that's been DCing altcoins and they just keep on dropping back to Bitcoin, right? I mean, you almost require an alt season just to get back to break even, right? At this point, because at least if you value your portfolio in satoshis, which is what I think people should do. I mean, a lot of people value their portfolio in US dollars, but I don't do that because I mean, the purchasing power of the US dollar is going to zero over a long enough period of time. I'd rather value my crypto portfolio in something else. And I don't want to buy, a risky altcoin that is likely going to give me a lower return than Bitcoin. Now, a lot of people say that, it's outperformed Bitcoin in a bull market. And I think they can be right, but you also have to have the macro conditions to support it. And so we're still in the environment of tighter monetary policy, right? Where Bitcoin is doing better. So it doesn't mean that Bitcoin can't go down. We've seen Bitcoin go down several times over the last few years, but it's just that if Bitcoin goes down, it's probably not going to go down as much as altcoins. And when it goes back up, it'll probably go up more than altcoins collectively. So any given year, there's going to be some altcoins that outperform, but it doesn't change, the overall trend. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that Bitcoin is the relative safe haven within crypto. I could see, things changing eventually. And by the way, I mean, my view of alts going to the range lows, that's kind of the optimistic scenario, right? Because the other way to look at this is not an oscillator. The other way to look at this would be to say, well, what if this is like a downtrend channel where you have lower highs and lower lows, right? So if that's the case, which I don't know if it is, right? But if that's the case, then Bitcoin dominance would go a lot higher than it currently is. So there's definitely 2 ways to look at it. For now, I'm just looking at it like alt Bitcoin pairs need to drop about 25% more, right? Another 25% drop by altcoins on their Bitcoin pairs will get them to the range lows. And I think at that point, you can start to have a more serious discussion of capital allocation within the cryptoverse rather than just being like mostly Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm. Before we get into kind of your take on altcoin season and what's coming next, I'm keen to show you this chart here, which you tweeted out earlier today. Historically, the Bitcoin market cycle top is when the 200-week SMA crosses the prior all-time high. Something to keep in mind. Can you talk us all through this chart and also the breakdown of what that could potentially look like, but also the time frame?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough chart because, like, anytime I post it, everyone's like, well, technically speaking, it's not perfect. If you look at the chart, it gets pretty close to predicting the all-time high of Bitcoin. By the time the 200-week moving average crosses the prior all-time high, that's normally when Bitcoin tops out, plus or minus like a month or two, right? So it doesn't mean that Bitcoin, has to top that exact day. It's just around that time you would expect that the top is in. And so what I'm thinking is that at least for this cycle, like all prior cycles, whenever that happens, which I mean, it should happen within the next, 6 to 12 months, right? I mean, it depends on what price does because it's a moving average. It's going to depend on what price does. But I would say that whenever that happens, the sort of the safe assumption would probably just be that we're going to have our typical midterm year bear market, right? All the bear markets that you see on that chart occurred in midterm years, 2014, 2018, 2022. And so my guess is that in terms of timing, the next bear market, where Bitcoin, drops more than just say 20 or 30%, would probably be in 2026. And again, that doesn't mean that you can't have any weakness this year. I actually think there will be some weakness in the third quarter of this year, kind of like we had the last couple of years. But I still think even with that weakness, you'll still see some strength, hopefully later in the year, which might correspond to around the time that the 200-week SMA might cross that prior all-time high. So it's one of those things to just kind of keep in the back of your mind, that as that event approaches, it would probably be worthwhile to stay somewhat level-headed, and just kind of remember that, I mean, there are diminishing returns. There's also diminishing losses. So hopefully the next bear market won't be as bad as the last one. Every bear market has gotten a little bit not as bad, right? They've been getting better. But yeah, that's basically basically everything that I meant by that chart.
Okay, fantastic. And you've mentioned that there might be a slight retracement in the markets, kind of looking out on the time frame. We've got kind of 12 to 18 months of a kind of bullish market momentum based on this metric. So fascinating career kind of getting into cryptography in 2012, and now you have Into the Cryptoverse, where you do provide charts and insights. I'm curious to hear from you, and I think people that are watching will also find this very valuable. Are there any data points or references that you can share with us that if people are looking to get into crypto or level up their data analysis metrics for 2025 and beyond, that you can say, okay, these are one or two clear indicators that you should be checking weekly that will give you an overview of the health and maybe new things to watch in the market?
Yeah, so I would say a couple of things. So I'll first talk about Bitcoin, and then I'll talk about like Ethereum and altcoins. For Bitcoin, what I do, a couple of things. What I do, the first thing, for the total market cap of crypto, I look at this chart. It's like basically the blue line is the total cryptocurrency market cap, and then the red line is just sort of a fit to all of that data. And so whenever the asset class is below that red line, Bitcoin dominance is generally going to go up. Okay, so when the asset class is considered, say, undervalued, which is arguably where it has been since like the middle part of 2022, the expectation is that liquidity will flow from altcoins into Bitcoin. So people should just get on the Bitcoin dominance train. Whenever this metric goes above the red line and starts to sustain itself, that's when your alt season occurs. So as long as we're below here, you're probably better off in Bitcoin than most altcoins. One of the main charts that I use to navigate crypto is just this risk level chart, right? Because this helps people, I think, identify, and it doesn't have to be this one, there's a lot of different ones, but the idea is that whenever the risk of Bitcoin is, say, between 0 to 0.2 or 0 to 0.3 or 0 to 0.4 or whatever, that's generally the time to really scale into Bitcoin for the next bull market. And so I use that a lot. What I'm also interested in is the social risk. The social risk is made up of people on YouTube, subscribers to subscribers to crypto YouTube channels, views to those crypto YouTube channels. And what's really interesting about this cycle that has so far been different from the last two is that Bitcoin is basically near all-time highs, but no one really cares, right? Like no one really cares. The social risk is incredibly low right now. And it kind of makes sense like why Bitcoin dominance is going up, because in order for Bitcoin dominance to go down, you actually need retail to return and start buying up altcoins hand over fist, right? And until that happens, we'll likely see Bitcoin suck liquidity out of the rest of the cryptoverse. So I'm constantly watching the social risk. It is still relatively low. And that's kind of a weird thing that Bitcoin's at 109K and the social risk is all the way down there. But I think the reason for it is because if you look at something like this is the advanced decline index of the top 100 cryptocurrencies. It just keeps on putting in new lows, right? It's kind of like what happened last cycle, where it just kept on going down and it didn't start going back up until monetary policy really pivoted. So I think social risk is low, social interest is low because interest rates are high and quantitative tightening is continuing. When that stuff changes, then market conditions can change. Now with Ethereum, what I've been using is this regression band, right? So if we switch this over to Ethereum, the first time that I bought Ethereum this cycle with US dollars was actually back over here in April, right? This is the first time. And the reason is because I just consider that to sort of be home for Ethereum, right? I sort of had this meme that was created because it took so long to happen that Ethereum would eventually go home. And the idea was that in order for ETH Bitcoin to bottom out, ETH USD needed to break down, right? And so ETH USD broke down, it went home. It doesn't mean it can't go lower. I mean, it could always revisit those levels. Like it's not impossible for that to happen. But for me, this is sort of like the fair value of Ethereum, right? Like right now, the fair value of Ethereum, according to this chart, is around 16 to 1700. That's the fair value. So when it went below that, I was a buyer. Now, the thing for alt season that we need, right, in order for something like that to happen, which who knows, right? I mean, there's no guarantee of anything in these markets, but in order to actually get alt season, which is what people want, ETH Bitcoin needs to bottom out. And it's possible that it has bottomed, right? I hope it has bottomed because, I've been watching this trend for a long time where ETH Bitcoin has been putting in higher lows. And this is a higher low still, but it's also been putting in lower highs, right? So I've always kind of been of the opinion that the ETH Bitcoin pair is converging to whatever the fair value is, right? Like it's on its own logarithmic regression curve and it's converging to whatever the fair value is. That's been my base case for Ethereum. And so I really hope that it has bottomed out. The only reason that it might go back down, there's two reasons. First of all, alt Bitcoin pairs, I don't think have gone low enough. I think ETH Bitcoin has gone low enough. I don't think alt Bitcoin pairs have. So I don't really consider ETH an alt. I consider it to be sort of between Bitcoin and the altcoin market, just because it's been number two for so long. But you can even see last cycle that when ETH Bitcoin bottomed out, it had a pretty nice rally up to that 20-week SMA, 21-week EMA, and then it got rejected, came back down, put in a double bottom or a higher low. And then when that happened, then altcoins, that's when Ethereum really started to outperform Bitcoin. That's also when altcoins really started to outperform Bitcoin. So if ETH Bitcoin does fall back in here, I think there's a good chance that's the low, right? I think there's a good chance that the low for ETH Bitcoin is in, but I think that if it falls back in here, it's going to cause alt Bitcoin pairs to go to the range lows because ETH Bitcoin is well off of its low, but alt Bitcoin pairs are basically at their lows. So even if ETH Bitcoin puts in a higher low, alt Bitcoin pairs could easily come down to their own range lows, right? So those are the main indicators I'm watching, right? For Bitcoin, I'm watching the risk levels. For Bitcoin dominance, I'm watching monetary policy. For Ethereum, I'm just watching the risk and also the logarithmic regression trend line. And for altcoins, I'm primarily just watching this chart. Whenever they go to the range lows, that's when they might actually start to go up. Remember, last cycle, when they went to the range lows, alt season did not immediately begin, right? They bounced around for a while before that actually happened. So it's a necessary but not sufficient condition. But I will say that by looking at a chart like this and just assuming that it's going to bleed until it hits the range lows, I think it's good for helping to preserve the Satoshi valuation of your portfolio, right? Because the altcoins can be tempting at different times, but it helps to preserve that so that by the time they get down here, your Satoshi valuation is pretty strong. And then, altcoins are very, very low. They're very undervalued. And maybe from there, you actually get all season.
I like that you do your portfolio valuation in Satoshis. I want anyone to comment if they also do the same. So on that theme, so you've mentioned that we have Bitcoin. You slightly view Ethereum as almost a different category of asset class to altcoins because it has been second in market cap for longer. I'm curious to hear your thoughts now on the kind of the meme coin psychology, but particularly within the Bitcoin ecosystem, because we did see end of 2024, the Bitcoin ecosystem was really one of the main drivers for new retail and the mass attention of the cryptocurrency sphere. In the altcoin space, but also in the Bitcoin space, what are any indicators that you can see? Is this gaining traction, or are you all eyes on Bitcoin at the moment?
I'm mostly all eyes on Bitcoin, a little on Ethereum, right? So I think if you were to look at, if you were to go over to a modern portfolio theory chart of say like Bitcoin and Ethereum, it essentially would tell you that in order to maximize your risk adjusted returns right now, you're about 83% Bitcoin, 17% ETH, right? That's what it says. You could add in some altcoins, but most of the altcoins are going to still give you 0%, especially some of the relics. I mean, if you look at Litecoin, and again, this is not my opinion, right? It's just based on what Litecoin has done, it suggests like 0% Litecoin. As far as meme coins go, we can't really use this tool because meme coins sort of come and go. Like most meme coins don't really stick around for more than one cycle. And so it's of course, it's more just dubious speculation. It's really hard to know. In the short term, any altcoin can always outperform Bitcoin, right? You have these meme coin waves. We've had a couple of spikes. If you look at others divided by Bitcoin, this is basically everything outside of the top 10 divided by Bitcoin. When you look at this, you can see that that others divided by Bitcoin, there have been some, or sorry, no, this is just others. This is not others divided by Bitcoin. If you look at others divided by Bitcoin right here, you can see that it just keeps on going lower. So while there have been like a constant creation of new altcoins, new meme coins, some of those meme coins, do well. They outperform other altcoins, other meme coins for a while. I view it as just a rotation of capital from like one meme coin ecosystem to another meme coin ecosystem. And then people keep trading these meme coins, but the altcoin market just keeps on bleeding back to Bitcoin, right? And again, like, it's something that makes me really unpopular to talk about this stuff because I think people would just prefer to hear, that alt season is around the corner and that that meme coins are they want me to say other things, but like I can't like ignore charts like this because to me, when you're now, it's now what are we? It's this topped in January of 2022. It just put in a new low 2 weeks ago, right? Like, so in my mind, while there's definitely been times that you could make money on altcoins, right? Like, I'm not going to pretend like there hasn't been, right? There have been some really great rallies, and I know people that have made money on altcoins, but they're all just short-term plays, right? They're not long-term plays. They're short-term plays. And if you're going to get into them, you have to be willing to rotate back to Bitcoin after just a few weeks or a few months, because if you don't, what's more than likely going to happen is those meme coins will then go back down and not recover. And then a new class of meme coins will then be the talk of the next altcoin rally, right? So it's a constant rotation. I get the hype behind altcoins. I get, that people really want meme coins to do well, but I can't ignore this chart, right? And again, it's made me very unpopular this cycle, but it is what it is. I don't control what it is, but it is what it is.
You don't control the charts. So we've compared kind of crypto against crypto. And as you've mentioned, you will compare the altcoins against the satoshis on the charts. But let's zoom out a little bit more. And I think this is a great kind of question to end on and to hear your perspective. It's just been a fascinating shift in the ETF demand that we have seen, particularly over the last 7 to 8 months. And I think if we move away from comparing crypto to crypto, the Bitcoin ETFs pulled in over $5 billion last month, and we saw gold ETFs with $1.5 billion in outflows. What do you hear? What perspective and take do you have when you hear this kind of news? And I think you can also pull in with your recent attendance at Bitcoin Vegas, where what is the consensus among investors right now? And are we finally seeing this larger digital transformation where people are choosing digital over more traditional safe haven assets in an era that we haven't really seen before?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's sort of like a sort of the West versus the East, because like in the West, we have all the Bitcoin ETF flows, and those continue to do pretty well. And occasionally I'll check in on it, and they'll be at new highs, right? So there's still flows going into the spot ETFs, which is always good to see. And with gold, you haven't really seen that same level of interest, which is really interesting because gold is also basically at all-time highs, right? I mean, it's not like it's doing badly. But I mean, if you looked at gold on its Bitcoin valuation, it's a funny stat. If you look at on TradingView, if you look at the gold valuation against Bitcoin, gold is down so much against Bitcoin since inception that it just rounds it to negative 100%. That's how far down gold is against Bitcoin. So I think you're right. Like I think the West is sort of more gearing or more sort of leaning towards this new digital trend and finding sort of the safe haven in Bitcoin. But that's not true in the East, right? If you look at like China and just other places in Asia, you'll actually see a lot of focus has been actually made on gold and flows into gold over the last few years. So it almost seems like there's a pretty big divergence right now in what people find sort of their safe haven asset. Some people it's gold, some people it's Bitcoin. If I'm being honest, I think there's space for both, right? I think there's space for both. I think you could have, I've always been of the assumption that like gold has a place in a portfolio, but last cycle, I would just say like 3 to 5%. This cycle, I've said more like 7 to 10 because I think the macro favors, commodities like gold right now. But at the same time, you also don't want gold to be like a really large position in your portfolio. I don't think, like it doesn't make sense to have it like, 60, 70, 80% or anything like that, because over the macro scale, risk assets outperform gold, right? I mean, we've seen that happen over and over and over again. So, I mean, absolutely, there can be times where gold outperforms, but I think over the macro scale, risk assets will still outperform. The S&P historically outperforms gold for really long periods of time. There'll be a few years where gold will take hold, which is why I think it deserves a spot in a portfolio, but I don't think it deserves the spotlight, right? It deserves a spot, not the spotlight. So, yeah, I mean, I think you're right. The West is more so moving in the digital direction. The East is kind of staying with the more traditional assets.
Amazing. And the spotlight at the moment, it sounds like with you guys, is Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'll say this because it'll at least give people to talk about. I think that if there's going to be an alt season this cycle, which hopefully there is, right? Hopefully there is. I mean, it'd be nice for people to actually, make some money on their altcoins. But I would say if there's going to be one, I don't think it'll occur until November is my guess. And so I think if you stay mostly Bitcoin for now, and stay maybe a little bit Ethereum because I think ETH Bitcoin might have actually bottomed. So Bitcoin mostly, maybe like 90-10, something like that. And then perhaps a small pivot to alts later on this year if they hit the range lows. I think that's the way to navigate this cycle. And again, if you look at a chart of all Bitcoin pairs and you see when they rallied the last 2 years, they rallied starting in November. There was a small rally in the summer, which is kind of maybe what's happening right now. There's a small rally in like June, July, but the bigger rally didn't occur until November. So that's my base case. All Bitcoin pairs down until November. If there's an all season, that's when it's going to occur.
I'll link for anyone that's watching Ben's socials as well, so you can give Ben a follow to check in and follow up. But Ben, thank you so much for giving us the breakdown. It was great to catch up. It feels like it's been such a long time. And I really appreciate you sharing your insights today. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to see you again. I know it has been like a year or something since I think we last spoke.